Three triplet siblings met each other after 20 years to realize they were siblings. Why, you may ask? Because an experiment went wrong. Experiments lead to innovation, sometimes the innovation of brilliant devices or methods. Other times, innovation also leads to devastation. And peeking back into the human history, we do have some bone-chilling examples of experiments that turned out to be the most disturbing ones.
Make Halloween fun with one-stop shopping
The
at
sharper you want your memories, the more you need Kodak.
Welcome to another expedition on our channel, and in today's video, we will shed light on some of the most disturbing experiments ever conducted and recorded in human history. Experiments that have kept haunting us humans for years. But before we begin, take a moment to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell icon. Let's begin. Separating triplets. Back in the 60s and 70s, an experiment led by Peter Neubauer and Viola Bernard involved separating three triplet siblings from one another. Well, that's actually pretty weird of an experiment, because what exactly was the objective of that experiment has remained unknown. However, 20 years later, the triplets accidentally found each other to realize they were siblings, and expressed utter regret over the years lost being apart. The experiment heads even then expressed no remorse over their doings, as they went on to say that they thought their experiment was something good, as they were trying to separate the kids to enable them to develop individual personalities. However, the truth will remain hidden for many more years until 2066, because that's the time till when the results of this experiment have been stored in the archive at Yale University. This experiment remains one of the most emotionally haunting and depressing experiments, taking into account the regret the triplets would have felt. Japan's Unit 731. While the last experiment was something conducted on three individuals, here we're talking about evil experiments being conducted on countless innocent lives. That's right, throughout the 1930s and 1940s, the Japanese Imperial Army conducted a lot of experiments on civilians in China to develop their understanding. While the idea of gaining an understanding was fair, but it was conducted with utter brutality and barbarianism. The experiment gets its name from its head, General Shiroishi, who was the lead physician at Unit 731. The objective of his mission was to study a wide range of diseases to work out their potential warfare use. Diseases such as plague, anthrax, dysentery, typhoid, paratyphoid, and cholera were spread across Chinese cities to see how damaging they were. But things didn't stop here, because prisoners were also put in freezing weather and analyzed in order to find the best possible treatment for frostbite. Furthermore, prisoners were also fed with poisonous gas and were forced into pressure chambers where their eyes popped out, and even worse, were dissected when alive and conscious. Now, these were the sheer atrocities committed during these experimentations. However, what happened next was even more shocking. Because after the war, instead of taking the accused to the courts, the US helped Japan in keeping the experiments a secret in an attempt to make Japan a Cold War ally, and hence dirty deeds have since then remained hidden. The Burke and Hare murders. Dissections and studying the human bodies has remained foundational in providing medical students with the opportunity to study and experiment their knowledge, obviously in correct and supervised ways, and effectively. There have always remained laws in place to legally allow practitioners and hospitals to acquire bodies for dissection and study. But things took a ferocious turn eventually when enough bodies were not available for studies, and hence people would either pay grave robbers for dead bodies or, equally worse, would go on to rob bodies from graveyards themselves. This thing was taken a step further by two people, William Hare and William Burke, two friends. These two people owned a boarding house where students would come in and stay. These two minds thought the evil way and went on to kidnap and kill students who would come and stay in their boarding house. They would then supply those freshly dead bodies to the anatomist Robert Knox. Surprisingly, Robert failed to notice the freshness of the bodies, and hence this dangerous act continued. However, eventually, Burke was hanged for his crimes, and this led to the formulation of the Anatomy Act of 1832, which made a greater number of dead bodies to be legally available to schools, and schools which were associated with teaching hospitals. Guatemala syphilis study. While this story has had many versions which were mostly inaccurate, the correct one was that between 1946 and 1948, the US and Guatemalan governments co-sponsored a study which involved deliberately infected 1,500 men, women, and children with syphilis. The main goal of the study was to test chemicals to prevent the spread of the disease. And guess what? This study was conducted in one of the most bizarre ways. The researchers comprehensively planned a way of violating vulnerable individuals, such as those in depression, and grievously aggravated and infected them. The Stanford Prison Experiment. What happens when you put good people in evil situations? This is a question that aims at testing the nature of the human nature. And back in 1971, Philip Zimbardo decided to take things into his own hands and answer such questions, but unfortunately, in the most unethical and unusual way. He went on to set up a prison and hired college students to play the roles of prisoners and guards. The idea was to put normal people into unusual roles and test how their nature changes. This experiment was initially decided to last for 2 weeks, nevertheless, was abandoned just 6 days after it began. Now, you might be wondering why? Well, things went haywire and became chaotic, as students who were playing the roles of guards became very violent and started humiliating those playing the roles of prisoners by stripping them naked, treating them awfully, and so forth. On the other hand, students who played the roles of prisoners got depressed and expressed symptoms of stress. Now, to many, this experiment seemed way weird to some, as it sounds extremely unusual for people to behave this way. But when a report was released in June 2018, things started seeming logical. According to the reports, the guards didn't become aggressive themselves. Instead, they were instigated and pumped up by Zimbardo himself, and the abusive behavior came from there. As for the prisoners, some of them faked their emotional breakdowns, making the validity of the entire experiment somewhat controversial. The Monster Study. 2 people, Johnson Vendel and Mary Tudor, conducted a disturbing experiment on orphans. They wanted to test their hypothesis that negative feedback could potentially induce stuttering in children. And to test this theory, what they did went on to create lasting consequences for the children involved. The duo formulated a method and divided a bunch of children into 2 groups. Children in one of the groups received positive speech therapy, whereas the other group, which was referred to as the experimental group, received negative feedback and criticism for their speech, regardless of how well they spoke. And so, their hypothesis did prove right, because students from the experimental group did end up with speech problems. But with that came more problems which were psychological, and hence the students struggled with their speech in the long term. Due to these reasons, the experiment has been criticized by people worldwide for its unethical way of testing their hypothesis and creating long-term problems for the students involved. The Tuskegee Study. From 1932 to 1972, for 4 decades, a study was conducted by the U.S. Public Health Service, which involved ceasing the treatment of syphilis for a group of African American men in Alabama, even after penicillin became widely available. Now, this is way weird, right? And you might be guessing, why would they want to do it? Well, the reason behind this deed was somewhat selfish, because the researchers staked the life of the patients to study the natural progression of the disease, and even worse, the patients were not even informed of what was being done to them, and they believed they were being treated. This dangerous experiment proved to be fatal, as the participants faced severe health consequences. These were some of the most disturbing experiments that have been conducted on people in the past. Due to their disturbing and devastating natures, they've been etched in history as a lesson for future generations to never do things with wrong motives. If this video gave you a glimpse of the terrors from the past, take a moment to hit the like and subscribe buttons for more similar informative content. And before you leave, take a moment to ring the bell icon to stay tuned. See you in another video.